All right, so let's get reaction. We're joined via Zoom by SOS Coalition National Co-chair Uyanda Siyotula. Uyanda, good afternoon. Thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
Let's start off by getting your reaction to the two-step approach towards analog switch-off, perhaps as announced by government just a little earlier on today.
So we do welcome this two-step approach, and I think the one question that we have on our side is, why is this only being considered now? Because, I mean, if it was an option on the table, it should have been considered quite some time back. But nonetheless, we do welcome it. And I think it just gives us enough time as a country. It gives government enough time to obviously have processes in place that will ensure that no one really is left behind and that people continue to have access to free-to-air television in South Africa.
There's been criticism to the slow pace of the digital migration process to date. We understand that this was supposed to obviously happen back in November of 2011. Due to several reasons, perhaps on legal, technical and funding front, walk us through, in your opinion, what's constituted to those delays to date.
I mean, there's been so many delays, as you mentioned. I think we're even, we're behind with more than 10 years now. And I think one of the reasons is obviously, the fact that our government at first actually did not have a proper plan. And when we did have a digital migration plan, it wasn't followed correctly. And now we're at a point where, our communications department has been, changing ministers, almost every year. And there just has not been anyone to carry out, a proper plan to ensure that this digital migration actually does happen and it happens properly. But I think now we're at a stage as a country that we actually realize the benefits of this digital migration. And I think this particular process actually needs to happen, but it needs to happen correctly so that, the indigent and, the people of South Africa are not left behind and continue to have access to information, particularly as we're approaching, elections. People need to continue to have access to news and information in order for them to make informed decisions about who they want to vote for.
No, absolutely. Speaking to the issue of access, last year South Africa's Constitutional Court decided to strike down the government's plans to end the old-style analogue at the end of June. At this point, what needs to happen to ensure that ultimately nobody's left behind?
So just to go back to that particular case, actually SOS and Media Monitoring Africa were amicus to that particular court case, and we were part of that case representing the public interest. And I must say that we're quite disappointed that the minister has failed to consult us in this particular process. The public interest, we feel that it has not been taken into consideration before determining this two-step approach. Having said that, what needs to happen, I mean, I think also what I've heard and what I'm quite happy about is the mention of the re-registration, the reopening rather of the registration process to ensure that those that did not manage to register before, before 30 September 2022 actually have the opportunity. So what needs to happen is for that registration process to actually be reopened properly, because what I've heard the minister mention is the fact that those that registered after that, cut-off date will be considered. But what we actually want is for him to call upon, those that missed the opportunity, to call them to register and ensure that they are not left behind, but not to just merely say, no, we will ensure that we do cater for them or we do consider them. People need to know that the registration process is reopened and there's an opportunity for them to apply. But what we are also concerned about is the missing middle, because what we've realized is that in the campaign of the department, there has not been mention of those who earn above 3.5, who are not considered to be indigent. What is the plan for them? Where do they get these commercial set-top boxes? What other options are there in terms of getting television sets that, have got this digital tuner in order for them to be able to access digital, terrestrial television? So all that information needs to be part of the government's campaign so that people know what options are there. And I think what's also important is to ensure that as we move to the digital to the digital broadcasting services. We don't want our people or our poor people to only have the option of pay TV. We need them to have access to free-to-air television, and that free-to-air television is accessible and available on the DTT platforms. That's what we need to be pushing for, to ensure that all these options are actually available to the public.
So, Uyanda, as we conclude, do you think that we're ready for the switch off at this point? You spoke about welcoming the decision to reopen registration. Currently, there's about 1.5 million applications received by government for subsidized SA top boxes. Help us understand what you think about that, and talk to the implications this has for the country, perhaps as we head into elections.
So currently, I definitely do not think we're ready, but I think this process actually gives us a whole year to get ready as a country. It gives all the broadcasters, all the free-to-air, television broadcasters to actually, put proper systems in place to ensure that there is content and that there is alternatives for people. Say, for instance, if we speak about the SABC, the digital, so that gives them an opportunity to actually start now to create programs for people to actually watch on the digital terrestrial television. And I think, as I said, that we are not ready as a country, we are not ready, but government actually needs to play its role to ensure that people are well informed. So a public awareness campaign is obviously critical. And I think this is what government has been missing all along, because, since 2015, and I think right up to 2021, government was quiet. People didn't know what was happening about the analog switch off and the digital migration process. So we need to have constant public awareness, civic education, where people are educated about the digital migration process and the options that are available to them. And I think to answer the second part of your question, as we're going to elections, it is obviously important that people remain with that right to have access to information. And if that is taken away from them, obviously it is an infringement of their right to freedom of expression. And I think, one thing that government needs to get right to ensure that people remain, with, television screens that are operating and with, access to information, is to ensure that there is proper research that is conducted and there is proper installations, as well as, quality, installations, because what we realize is that even the numbers that we've been receiving throughout the update on the digital migration, process, some of those STPs are not working. So people are ticked off as having been, installed these STPs, but actually they do not have access to television. And one evidence for that is the fact that SABC lost about 40% of its audience right after the 5 provinces were switched off. So we need to do it correctly this time. We cannot have these very same problems come 31st December when government switches off finally.
Uyanda, thank you for your time with us here on the SABC and for weighing in on the back of that briefing. SOS Coalition National Co-ordinator Uyanda Siyotula speaking on the back of the briefing by Minister of Communications and Digital Technology Mondli Gungubele, talking to the digital migration and also the analog switch off, which is set to take place in 2 phases starting from the 31st of July. Again, thank you to Uyanda for her time with us here on the SABC.